Hi everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Beth Bollinger, and today we're going to talk about AI and nonprofit. This is a topic dear to my heart. I like to imagine that AI can do some good in the world. And it's also a really interesting one because there's traditionally a little bit of a gap between nonprofits and for-profit firms in terms of technology adoption. But with AI, we see an even bigger gap than usual. So I started by looking into that. But there are some nonprofits out there that are doing some really incredible things with AI. And so here we're going to try to learn from them. I've broken it out into two main use cases. So we're going to go over the framework a little bit, then talk about administrative use cases, mission-driven use cases of AI, pathways for nonprofits to begin incorporating this into their organization, and then just a couple caveats to bear in mind. So first, we're going to talk about the framework. So I've divided this up into administrative use cases and mission-driven use cases. And so administrative use cases of AI are really operational. They are helping the nonprofit with indirect operational challenges. And then mission-driven use cases are really interesting. They're using AI to directly drive the social impact, to directly execute the mission. These are less common, more tailored solutions, a higher risk and technically challenging, but really interesting to look at and are creating some really cool impact. So most nonprofits can benefit from administrative AI right now. There are vendor solutions that exist. Mission-driven AI has some challenges that come with it and might take a while before we're even really there. But there are some cool pilots out there right now that we'll talk about. So first, diving in a little bit to administrative use cases. So we'll go through some examples. There's four main use cases that I identified for administrative that have been really impactful for nonprofits so far. So the first is targeting donors. So this is using AI tools like Google Ads to figure out who's most likely to care about your cause, who's most likely to donate, and target them directly. This saves a lot of time and a lot of wasted advertising dollars searching for donors. You can also analyze donors directly. Typically, about 14% of donors are responsible for 85% of donations. And so by using AI tools, you can predict who that 14% is more likely to be and get them engaged with the organization. Grant writing is also a big one. With generative AI, this has become possible recently. It takes 30 to 120 hours for a nonprofit to write a single grant, and it often takes many, many grants to support a nonprofit every year. And so AI-based generative AI technology to help write grants can help increase grant writing efficiency up to 5 times, which is just a huge time savings for nonprofits. And then finally, training volunteers is a really interesting one. So the Trevor Project, which helps LGBTQ youth, developed a chatbot that simulates a youth in crisis that volunteers can use to practice how they're going to respond. And notice that they did not try to replace the volunteers with a chatbot. It is still people that are helping out the youth that are in need, but the chatbot can help volunteers practice, train, and get comfortable with those emotional situations so that they can help youth better. And so in terms of the challenges for all of these administrative use cases, it can be difficult to justify the cost, especially when it's another large administrative system you're implementing. It can be difficult to ensure adoption. You can imagine if you implement the system and none of the employees or volunteers use it, you're not going to get the value out of it. And then also protecting donors and volunteers' privacy is huge. So best practices to address these challenges are to justify the cost in terms of the time saved. So it's incredibly important to measure the time that you're going to save, measure the time that you do save by implementing these tools. And every hour not spent doing something administrative is doing something to further the mission. And that is so huge. So measure the time saved, and any organization that wants to really deliver on the mission will place a premium on those hours. This seems like a no-brainer, but to ensure adoption, ensure the workload is actually easier for everyone. It's so typical to implement a system that you think will save time, and then all of a sudden you spend all of the time saved inputting data or troubleshooting the system. So make sure that workload actually becomes easier rather than just shifted to doing something else that's often less enjoyable. And then finally, engage both your vendors and your stakeholders on privacy issues. Also seems like a no-brainer, but I have a couple of stories about organizations that have spent hours and hours developing a tool that volunteers did not want to use because it relied on their own personal data. So before you spend those hours developing a tool, engage employees, engage your volunteers, understand what privacy issues are important to them. So next we're going to talk about mission-driven use cases. And these are more unique, less common, more tailored solutions using AI to directly drive social impact. And so these are a bit hard to categorize, but I identified 3 main ways that we can break this down, but these are by no means exhaustive. So the first is going places that humans cannot. And so this could be an area of conflict, a rural area that's hard to get to, somewhere where there's disease that you want to help, but you can't send humans into directly. So for example, UNICEF has been using autonomous drones as a pilot project to deliver vaccines to hard to reach areas. There are also some instances of using autonomous technologies during the pandemic to get aid to people in need while protecting volunteers from getting sick. And so these kinds of uses, going places humans cannot, can have an impact across a broad range of nonprofits serving a broad range of missions. The second is identifying situations where aid is needed and responding automatically. So we call this situational awareness and automated response. And this is using data to more quickly identify someone that could benefit from the nonprofit's help. So an example is the Child in Need Institute developed a model to identify vulnerable women and children and intervene immediately. And so this can all happen automatically by predictors that the model uses. And this saves a lot of time trying to find the people that need help and trying to get aid out to them. And then finally, providing knowledge or assistance. This is kind of a broad catch-all, but AI tools can do a great job to help with translation, with knowledge, with just getting information into people's hands where you just would not have the manpower to get an individual person out there helping someone. So for example, Wadwani AI developed a model to help cotton farmers in rural areas and low-income countries identify pests and determine the opportune time to spray pesticides. And so this was like a huge social issue for these farmers. It's their livelihood. And by getting this out to them in an app, it can provide them the knowledge and tools to help their cotton production without actually having someone having to go out there and train them on this. So some of the challenges with mission-driven AI in general, this is a huge one. I could spend like an hour talking about this alone, but bias and risk of harming the vulnerable. So we talk about bias in AI all the time in terms of for-profit organizations, but it is infinitely more impactful for nonprofits because oftentimes the people who AI tools might be biased against are exactly the ones that you're trying to help. And so if you're trying to develop a mission-driven tool, having something that's biased against the people you're trying to help will directly undermine your mission. And so this is one where really we might not be there yet in some cases, but keep watching it and keep bearing in mind the effect of bias on AI. The other challenges are lack of data. Typically, you don't have as much data on vulnerable populations as well, and then scaling and maintenance. So maintaining the AI solution after you've developed it, typically there's a lot of excitement when you're doing a cool pilot, less excitement when you're trying to sustain it for many years. So best practices for addressing these is to collect your own data and label your own data if you're building a custom tool. And this will help both gather the data on the people that you need and also eliminate bias in the process. So it's essential if you're trying to build a custom thing to collect your own data. Also forming partnerships. If you need the technological expertise, forming partnerships with big tech companies, they typically want to lend their tools to help do some good in the world, and they're willing to partner and help build these mission-driven solutions. And then finally, make a plan for maturity upfront so that you can get people to commit to sustaining it in the long term when you still have that pilot level excitement. So pathways forward for nonprofits vary depending on your technological experience level and which use cases you're trying to go forward with. So if you're inexperienced with technology, I would recommend focusing on administrative use cases. But in the meantime, build your technological expertise and prepare for more uses of AI and technology in your organization in general. And you can do this by diversifying your board, bringing on board people who have experience with technology or interest in it, making data a habit. So your organization is already collecting tons of data. Make sure to keep it organized and prepare for the day that you may need it. And then experiment with vendor solutions. Like we talked about on the administrative use case side, there are tools out there that can already help you with donor search and grant writing. And then second, if you're more experienced with technology, you can use those administrative use cases and get a lot of benefit from them now, but you can also start thinking about those mission-driven use cases. If you want to start exploring using AI to directly affect your mission, start thinking about your biggest problems independently of your solutions. So think about what problem you try to solve, where you want to have an increased reach or more automated impact, and then figure out whether AI is the right tool, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Be wary of bias. In some cases, the tools might not be there yet, and just be aware of that, and make sure that you're not doing more harm than good. And then finally, hiring a dev team from a lot of diverse backgrounds. Unlike for-profit institutions, you don't just want developers that have a ton of experience. You also want developers that may be newer or less experienced, but really passionate about your cause. And in some cases, those people who are passionate about your cause and also, have some experience coding, but not as much as others, can be the most beneficial on a team. So finally, just a couple caveats to close. Remember that AI is not always the solution. We love to get excited about it. It's made some really cool impacts, but it's not the right fit for every problem. I won't go through these all in detail, but this is a 7-question test adopted from Wadhwani AI, which builds AI solutions for social impact to determine whether AI is the right fit. So I'll call out number 2 in particular. If there's a non-AI solution that will work as well, maybe look into that first if it's more explainable and easier to implement. But above all, don't forget the human connection. That is the most important thing. So many nonprofits make incredible impact because of people who care, because of helping others, and whether you're using technology or not, keep that in mind at the core of your organization. And don't replace instances where somebody is just genuinely helping someone else. So in summary, we talked about administrative and mission-driven use cases. Most can benefit from administrative today. Mission-driven might not quite be there yet. There's some out there doing incredible things. Keep an eye on those as it develops. Thank you.
Yes, great presentation, Beth. Question I had was just on the administrative use cases. I've seen some nonprofits that will, if they don't have the resources to do their own donor research, like building donor profiles, or work with third-party research firms to do that. I'm curious to see if you've seen any impact on the disruption of those types of firms that do donor research. Are they trying to adopt this technology themselves to not be disrupted, or what you've seen if you've seen anything in that space?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I think all the nonprofits that I spoke with either did their donor research themselves or already used a technology system to do it. But I could definitely see agencies that are specializing in doing donor research either really benefiting from this technology or potentially being disrupted by it. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. Good question.
Other questions? Yeah.
Whenever you were talking about the mission-driven use cases and talking about using AI to identify the populations, when you were reading about that one, did you see organizations using it whenever their aid budget increased, or did you see them using it when they had a static budget and they were using it basically to reallocate from one population to a population they thought was more in need?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I saw it mostly to increase the response time towards identifying those in-need populations. This came into play most where response time was really crucial. So there's another example. Facebook partnered with the suicide hotline to help automatically identify potential suicides and send first responders just automatically. And then there was another example where using AI tools and news crawlers, you can identify areas. This was Give Directly, was identifying areas impacted by natural disasters, and then immediately dispensing funds to the people in need just completely automatically. So I think it's less of a budget issue and more of a timing issue. This is the most valuable when you need a quick response time. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's probably not a reallocation if it's for stuff that's happening like it's a problem in this moment because it's like disaster related or something. So that
Yeah.
would mean it's like not a reallocation.
Right, probably using their existing budget just in a different way. But also a lot of these came to be as a result of partnerships with tech companies. Pretty much all of the mission-driven use cases resulted out of a partnership of some sort. So I think a lot of the times any additional budget was also coming from the tech firm. Yes.
Are you seeing pressure from donors around becoming a little bit more AI savvy? Because typically in a grant, about 10% is administrative cost, 90% needs to go to end beneficiary. I would imagine donors saying, we want that to be 5% now that this school has come up.
Yeah.
Is that something you're seeing as a trend?
So I've actually seen a mix on that. I've heard some nonprofit leaders I spoke with said that their boards were kind of wanting them to get more tech savvy, use more technology to, have better response, be better with technology. Some actually said that their boards were a little bit resistant to technology and pushed back on wanting to, more funds to invest in some technological system that would do something. So I think it's pretty split on that, and that comes back to why diversifying your board is always a good habit, to bring both technologically minded people and also not people without technology experience together. So because probably somewhere in the middle you'll find the right balance of devoting funds to technology versus to other ways to further your mission. All right, thank you.